Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. About an hour ago, it was announced that the John Klingberg experiment in Toronto has come to an end. He is undergoing season-ending hip surgery. His season is done. He's missed like 2 to 3 weeks at this point with a nagging hip injury that apparently he's had since last season. So the Leafs are shutting him down, and obviously with this, his $4.15 million salary cap hit will go to the LTIR, freeing up money for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So although this was an utter disaster of a free agency signing, the Leafs basically get a redo. Well, they're going to have to give up some assets this time, but they can correct what has happened compared to other sports where they just be screwed. They get the money back, $4.15 million to play with now, and they better get active with it considering the current Leafs D pairs. They obviously have Timothy Liljegren out after that hit with Brad Marchand, hit by Brad Marchand. And obviously Mark Giordano broke a finger about a week ago and is week to week. So at this point, you got guys like William Lagesson, Sam Bonneau. Connor Timmins is actually pretty decent, but basically they have like 3 established veteran NHL defensemen at their disposal right now with Klingberg out. And Klingberg was just an utter disaster for them. He was god-awful defensively, one of the worst in the entire league, as well as being an offensive defenseman, having only 5 points, 5 of those being assists in 14 games, playing 20 minutes a night, basically. He was not in this like third pairing role. He was a disaster, and the Leafs have 3 actual NHL defensemen right now. So Brad Treliving kind of got to get active in terms of this. You cannot waste any time because they obviously are going to need someone to replace Klingberg, the role that they expected Klingberg to play this season, which was a decent second pairing role. So you look at it, $4.15 million. There's 4 guys that I think that they will heavily pursue, or 3 guys that I think they're going to heavily pursue, and then 1 kind of maybe sleeper guy that they could go after for cheap. So let's dive right into it. The first guy is Chris Tanev of the Calgary Flames. Tanev only has 1 year left at $4.5 million. So the Leafs would have to get around 10% retained from the Calgary Flames. I'm sure the Flames will be able to do that, especially considering they didn't retain anything off Zadorov's $3.8 million contract. And when you look at Tanev, he's basically the exact opposite of John Klingberg. So maybe you want to go in the complete utter direction and just get that lockdown defensive defenseman like a Chris Tanev. He's been consistently one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league over the past basically like 5 years, basically since he got to the Vancouver Canucks and played with Quinn Hughes. I think he would fit very well on this team. He's basically like an improved version of a Luke Schenn. Luke Schenn has the reputation of being a defensive and physical guy, but he's just a total liability with penalties and just not that skilled. Chris Tanev really would step into that second pair lockdown role. I'm not sure exactly who he'd play with. So if you're looking to shore up the defensive aspects of your game, if you're trusting your offense a little bit, Chris Tanev's definitely someone to look at. I think the price for him, especially considering this would be a trade where they get him for like 55 games. It's not a deadline deal where you get him for like 20 to 25 to 30 games. I would assume the price would be like a first round pick based on Craig Conroy's other deals. I don't know. Zadorov, obviously not as good as a Chris Tanev, but only got a 3rd and a 5th. Toffoli got a 3rd, and Jaeger Sharangovich, who I don't think is that good of a player. I think at the bare minimum, especially because they're retaining 10%, it's going to be a second round pick. Probably second round pick and a prospect, maybe even just a first. So that definitely won't be cheap by any means, but I think Chris Tanev for 55 games of Chris Tanev, it's definitely worth it. Another guy similar to Chris Tanev, considering he's on the Calgary Flames, not that similar in play style, is Noah Hanifin. Noah Hanifin obviously has been a pretty reliable 2-way top pairing guy for the Calgary Flames the last couple of years. You look at him, just solid offensively and defensively. Obviously had his best season in that 2022 year where the Calgary Flames did win the Pacific Division. But yeah, Noah Hanifin would walk on this team and be pretty easily their second best defenseman, in my opinion, overall. Definitely Morgan Riley's still that number 1, but he can really step up. You look at him, 2022, 48 points. Last year, still 38. This year, 12 and 25. He is just that reliable. I don't know if you'd break up Riley and Brody, but he would be a fantastic second pairing defenseman. And maybe, I don't think you probably would re-sign him. That's kind of tough with this, considering he is, 26 years old. Would you lock him up? Apparently, he was almost getting like $7 million if an extension happened with the Calgary Flames. But I think on a 1-year rental, I forgot to mention he makes $4.95 this year. So the Flames would have to retain a little bit more money. It would be around 16 to 17% instead of the 10% with Chris Tanev. So I think with Noah Hanifin, it would definitely cost at least a first-round pick, but I think that's definitely worth it. Noah Hanifin, I would say, is a top 50-ish. He's somewhere between like top 45 to 55 defensemen in the entire league. He is a legit top-pairing guy, and if you look at it, if you basically swap Noah Hanifin for John Klingberg, I know you'd have to give up a first-round pick, but that is a massive upgrade in terms of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the Calgary Flames, assuming they can't get an extension in place, I don't think they have that much bargaining power with a Noah Hanifin. I think this past summer, he would have got a first plus. I think at the deadline, a first-round pick sounds about right, especially with that Craig Conroy track record right now. So I think Noah Hanifin would fit very nicely on this team, especially with the depleted defense core that they have right now. The third guy that I think they are definitely going to head after is Sean Walker. Sean Walker has really came out of nowhere this year for the Philadelphia Flyers. He has 12 points in 25 games, but it's not just that. He's been fantastic defensively. This guy was like a bottom pair defenseman on the LA Kings, kind of thrown aside. I believe he was in the trade that involved Cal Peterson and Provorov. He was just thrown in that. No one really thought much of him, but he's killed it this year. He's absolutely killed it for the Philadelphia Flyers, both offensively and defensively, and is one of the main reasons why the Flyers are in the mix, why they have like a 56% points percentage that no one saw, is because Sean Walker has really emerged as a rock-solid, arguably top-pairing guy on that Philadelphia Flyers team. Do I think his first 25 games might be the best 25-game stretch he's going to have in his entire career? It's definitely possible, given the track record. He's not some like 23, 24-year-old. I believe he's in his late 20s. So you definitely are not, you can't expect to get what you've seen for the first 25 games from Sean Walker. But do I think he could be a very good second pairing defenseman on a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs instead of a guy like William Lagesson playing second pair role right now? Yes, I do think he would be an upgrade. He's only making $2.675 million this season, so you'd be able to get him. You don't have to retain any money, and you'd still have $1.5 million to go make a deal eventually at the deadline. So I think a guy like Sean Walker, they're already talking, a lot of teams are going to be interested in Sean Walker, and I think the Toronto Maple Leafs would be pretty smart to kind of snag him. It'd be similar, in my opinion, to like the Jake McCabe trade last season. Kind of an underrated defenseman that doesn't really get enough love. Jake McCabe is definitely more of a defensive defenseman, but I think Sean Walker can be the equivalent of that, bringing him in, maybe also getting like a Scott Laughton or something like that. You could maybe see a package of like a depth forward, because Ryan Reeves is fucking god-awful, but as well as Sean Walker coming over, because they have that $1.5 million on top of Sean Walker that they could add. So that's definitely something to watch in terms of Sean Walker. And the last guy, this is probably going to get shot down by most Leafs fans, and I definitely understand why, but my last proposed guy for them to trade for is Tony DeAngelo. If you want an all-offense defenseman, no defense, Tony DeAngelo is your guy. If you want to replace John Klingberg with him, just stay with that all-offense guy. You look at Tony DeAngelo, he's only making $1.675 million this year, so he's not much of a liability compared to a John Klingberg, who's making $4.15. Tony DeAngelo, again, you throw him in third pairing role, I think he can succeed. You put him on PP2, I think he can rack up some points. You put him with a defensive defenseman. You look at him in Carolina. Carolina's defense core is so loaded that he's been healthy scratch the last couple of games, and he was in Brendan Moore's doghouse, only playing like 16 minutes a night when he even was playing. But I think for cheap, you could get him for like literally nothing. I think Sean Walker, I forgot to add, I think Sean Walker would cost a second-round pick at least, maybe even a first-round pick, considering how good he's playing and considering he's only making $2.6 million. So when looking at a Tony DeAngelo, I think you could throw like a fifth-round pick in the Canes might like retain some money on Tony DeAngelo just to get him off their books, because right now, again, he's a healthy scratch, making $1.675 million. So that's definitely an outside the box and maybe a Tony DeAngelo rehabilitation program. But this is a guy that had 51 points in 64 games 2 years ago, 42 and 70 last year on a pretty horrible Flyers team. This year, he only had 7 and 16 because, again, he wasn't playing that much. But if you want to replace that offense defenseman with another all-offense, no-defense guy, Tony DeAngelo could be the cheapest best bang for your buck in terms of at a $1.6 million cap hit. But overall, I think the Toronto Maple Leafs got to move quick with this, considering their injuries right now and just the fact they're going to even win when Giordano and when Liljegren get back, you're probably going to take Connor Timmins out of the lineup. So they got to get moving. They got to get a guy before someone else. Obviously, Zadorov already wants out. They were apparently in the mix for Zadorov, but they couldn't put Klingberg on LTIR quite yet because they weren't 1,000% sure the diagnosis of his injury. So now that at Klingberg, they have the money, they don't need to retain. They wouldn't have had to retain on Zadorov. You got to get active because if Hanifin gets traded soon, if Tanev gets traded soon, Walker gets traded soon, if those three go and then the Leafs are stuck with like a Tony DeAngelo, that's going to be bad. In terms of who I think would be the best fit, obviously I'm going to go with Noah Hanifin because he has the best track record and is the most established guy in terms of two-way play. Wouldn't hate it if they got Tanev. Wouldn't hate it if they got Walker. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? When do you think we're going to see a trade regarding the Leafs blue line? I think it's going to happen pretty soon, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.